We're on Facebook Live and Twitter with our post-show, continuing our discussion about the rising number of mental health care issues in colleges and universities students of color face as they enter college. I was saying as we finished the live broadcast that what happens in the spectrum if you're grappling with issues before. Pam has just talked about half of the people come in with diagnosable illnesses. Then eventually, I presume, you graduate and you've got to deal with them out in the world. And you mentioned there's new interest.
Yeah, the National Association for Mental Illness, NAMI, has a campaign called CEOs for Stigma. And so the idea is raising awareness about mental health in an effort to decrease stigma. And so they're noticing the impact of mental health, how it impacts your performance, productivity. And so I think CEOs and businesses are recognizing that they need to provide education and support for their employees.
One of the things that I was interested in, as I looked again at the statistics, men are at the highest rate of suicides, usually white men. Then it goes down, as we look at men of color. But there are a number of men of color in sports recently who've come out to talk about mental health, their own struggles with mental health, and in a very public way, which is these are sports stars. This is huge, and one of them. Kevon, I'm terrible with sports, so I'm telling you, Kevon, I believe his last name is Jennings. He had a break at one of these games because he was sexually abused as a child, never told anybody, including his wife. He walked off the court, and then he's just written a book about it, and its lingering impact, which I think is really powerful. He says nobody's talking about this. To young men, and certainly, young men of color, they need to see me, and that, I pulled it together. But as much as I pushed it down during my working life, I could not completely ignore it. And what happened was somebody triggered him just years after a game. After it was a upbeat thing, they had won, everything was great, and you just never know where it's coming from because if you haven't grappled with it,
Yeah, and for men of color, I think they're even though their rates are lower, they're the fastest growing group who are actively completing suicides. And so we do have to take care and educate our black men about how to find those resources, how to communicate in terms of what's going on for them internally.
But I think part of that is actually engaging in emotions, and I think there are many cultural practices among many minority groups that says that what does a strong man look like? And he is not emotional, he's always dignified, he's always focused, he's taking care of his family, he's never complaining. And when you don't allow someone to engage in the full breadth of their emotions, they don't, right? They block them out, they push them away, and they don't ever actually take care of themselves in a way that uplifts them and supports them. So what you find are black men and other men are not doing the mental health work that's necessary to grow and take care of themselves. And they're finding themselves in extreme situations where one day they walk off a field, or they have to take an extreme leave from work because they can no longer continue.
Question from Facebook, is there a directory of clinicians of color, counselors of color that people could, reference?
I don't know if there is.
There's some on Facebook.
Is it out there?
It's one of my projects. Hopefully I can get it launched in a couple months, but I'm working to, I have a group of women of color in psychology that I work with. And so people often will reach out to me and I can find connections. But there's becoming more visibility about trying to make mental health professionals of color more visible. And so I think people are really at a place where they are reaching out. I've done a couple public speaking events around emotional wellness, and people are very engaged. They want to talk about this stuff. They appreciate the information that they get in terms of understanding symptoms and signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety. And at the end, people are coming up to me, I've been thinking about getting a therapist, can you help me find one? So it's really encouraging, actually, to see our people wanting to do the work.
I think about ABPSY, who's an American Black psychologist. I think they have a directory on their website. And then Psychology Today, they have, that's this resource where you can sort of see a photo and you get to see kind of what their expertise is. And so that's a little bit, even though it doesn't have that particular piece there.
And there's also a Google Doc that was circulating
Right.
a little while ago, but it was just circulated to all Black clinicians to add their information so that if
national,
people wanted to access it. So I think I actually have that in my email somewhere if you want to share it with
Well,
you.
please send it so we would post it online. We have a set of books. We have a set of programs that we know about that are specific to young people, and so we would love to post this information as well. In the meantime, we have another Facebook question, and what do you do if someone's in denial? How do you get them to get to help?
I was thinking, people have we are very resilient people, and I think about people of color and sort of, there are a lot of protective factors that people have. And so what we perceive as denial is also what's helping a person kind of get through day to day to day. And so I think the more we can acknowledge the things that a person is doing well, and to validate the things that they are, we'll remind them to keep doing that. And so whenever they maybe reach out for help or sort of find themselves talking to you about what they're doing, is to kind of notice that with them. Well, it sounds like you are appreciate talking to me about that, or appreciate talking about that at all. Have you thought about talking with someone else who maybe could actually help? And sometimes people of color, we'd rather we could sort of see ourselves going to primary care. Maybe there's an appetite issue, or maybe there's physical pain. And so sort of having a person, encouraging them to go to see their medical doctor often is sort of an entryway into having them get help from a therapist.
On the other end, too, is also the primary care physician asking the questions, because that's also a link that's very important to do that. Something that I read that Northeastern University is thinking about experimenting with is video therapy that you would get on your smartphone or your computer, which would, with a real therapist on the other end, just to, maybe if people feel like they can't walk into the office or go face to face.
I offer telehealth in my private practice, so there are a number of different platforms that people can use, and you video in. So it's been really helpful, particularly in the winter months when you get there's a snowstorm. But at first, some people have. I think generationally, there's a difference. But I think younger generations that's something that's very easy for them to access. But it works and it's helpful. So. And we find that the research shows that people are actually more open on teletherapy platforms than they may be in person.
What do you do if you have a family member, Facebook question, who says, don't want to take the medication, back to the medication. I want to go the natural route for healing. The herbs will help me.
I often tell...
You're sighing.
because I've seen it firsthand up front. And the first thing you lose is insight. And that makes it so much more difficult. You keep talking, you try to gain trust, and sometimes allowing that person who is in denial to some degree to read, if that's the way they take in information, or if they take in information through video, other kinds of programs. To be with them when they're going through that struggle.
I'm gonna get role play here. Pam, that's some white man stuff. I'm not taking that, because they've been poisoning our communities for years. I'm going to take this. I'm going to go down here and just get some herbs, and at least I know I'm controlling the natural. I know I have a problem, but I'm not trusting that stuff. They tested people in Tuskegee. All right. No, am I?
No, you're not.
Okay.
But there's the piece of, what? Trust me. Go ahead and take the herbs, but take this too.
Okay. All right.
It is such an insidious kind of disease.
Right. And the other thing I would often work, when we're trying to, particularly when I'm working with families, I often know it's not going to happen in my first conversation, that it's ongoing education, talking. And one of the things I would add to that in terms of you may be trying both, but what's the timeline that we're going to do? So if we're going to try, because I think you have to meet people where they're at. And giving them the opportunity to try something, it might work, we don't know. But so how do we know if it's not working? So we're not just some infinite thing, they're going to try this. But if I start seeing other symptoms appear or you're getting worse, then can we work to try something else? I think that's a way that you can engage in that conversation.
Because it will get worse.
Yeah.
And it does not take very long.
Yes. Sometimes it's important for the person who's in that helping position to also talk with someone, because to sort of be one person's only kind of support system can take its toll, and so to have them also talk with.
So that brings me to wondering how. This is probably less so for you, Pam, because you have a mixed age population. But in most of the campuses, they're younger people. But how are the parents? Are the parents helpful in this? Because if they're coming from families that have never thought this was, what are we talking about here? I didn't send you to school to be talking to somebody about, whether or not you're getting enough sleep. You should be getting those studies, right?
I find that there's a mixed bag. So some parents are in support because they just want their child to be better. And sometimes when a child is in a more extreme state of mind, the parents will do anything to get them to a place where they're not worried anymore.
Right.
But in instances where the parents are still resistant, what I always encourage, and I find that it sometimes helps, is just to start the conversation with a psychiatrist. So say, just go into the office. Say, I don't want medication today. Just talk about it. Ask to meet as many times as they and insurance will allow for you to figure out what's going to work for you. When you can start slow, when you can stop, how it's going to affect you. I also say don't look things up too much online on your own.
Oh, yeah.
Because the internet will have you convinced that every medication will be the death of you. And, we haven't figured out all the medication quite yet, so I can understand the scare. But when you're in a position where you can no longer do for yourself and you need an additional bit of help, then start the conversation and insist that you take time with it. But I think if people don't feel like it's their only option and they're being forced, they're more willing to engage with it. And having the parents involved in that conversation and the student helps them get there eventually. And it might take 3 weeks, 4 weeks,
4 years.
4 years.
Right.
But they'll come one day and say, I think I actually do need this extra bit of help. But you have to be patient.
The fact is that it is really rare for symptoms to manifest in an individual and have no one in their family with those symptoms. Right? I mean, it goes across generations and is common enough in the environment that the parents are not always clueless. They may not want to acknowledge the fact that this is a problem.
We just did a blind eye thing.
But it's rare that they don't see any of this in their family. I mean, that denial is high.
But I think that makes it worse sometimes because when the student then tells me, oh, my mom actually has anxiety too, but she refuses to acknowledge it, then the parent is that much more resistant to the help the student is receiving because they say, I'm doing fine. But then as the student describes to me,
my grandmother didn't have it, and she getting okay.
I'm like, oh, no, everyone's fine. Like, these are all the things I do to manage it. And I'm like, it sounds like your mother might have OCD, right? And it's like, they're not managing it well, actually. But but they consider themselves doing well, so they're resistant to their child engaging anything different.
From Facebook, could you repeat the information about the Steve Fund?
The Steve, so you text Steve, STEVE, to 741-741. And it's like a crisis line, a person on the other end who is trained as a crisis counselor who will interface with you, message back and forth with you.
Okay. A question. So when I was in college, I know that was a minute ago.
Not that long ago.
We were dealing with, people were trying to deal with, sexual awareness. So as a part of a whole compendium of, many things that were tried, we had peer sex counselors, meaning people our own age. Is that something that can work with mental health? Where you have is there some level of peer counseling that could actually helps students of color in this way?
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to talk
Anxiety,
about well, so I think
particularly
several schools there are different sort of programs that are instituting this in where they're asking for volunteers to sort of take regular classes so that they can sort of be able to talk to your peers. So what we know is that students are more likely to go to their peers about most things that are pretty significant in their life before they will actually tell an adult or certainly a professional. And so, like at BU, there's something called sort of Terriers Connect, and so there are ways that both students and faculty and staff can sort of get trained to listen out and sort of basically be able to have the conversation about how about talking to somebody else. And so, and there's several different schools in the area that sort of do similar things too.
And I find that there are also, students will form like clubs. If I recall, Wellesley had a club that focused on like mental health issues.
Oh, yeah, Active Minds.
Yes, Active Minds. And they're just a student club, and they're just interested in supporting one another. And sometimes just speaking to your friend, and that friend just saying, you should go to the counseling center, walking you there, helping you make the appointment, is the only step you need. So if there's even student organizations, even if they're not funded by the institution, can be a great step in helping students get the help they need.
Given the limited resources, colleges can't be everything to, you know, this is a huge task. You have other responsibilities that you're taking on to educate them. So how is this going to play out? I mean, at some point there has to be some kind of balancing and, you know, how you determine.
I think right now it's being balanced by the people who are holding the money for the budget, which is very unfortunate. We know that, at least as a community college, we cannot offer long-term counseling, right? So if we identify a student or a student identifies as having a major mental illness, our job is to stabilize and referral, you know, so that they have outside help where they have help through the financial pieces. And on the lighter side of the scale, what we try to do is to really foster a healthier environment so that students are willing to talk about it, you know, during finals or during midterms. You make sure that your students know where to go for help if they get stressed. But no, I don't see more money coming down the road, even though we should probably be doubling those budgets, if not tripling them.
And it's that kind of an ethical and philosophical question that I think colleges and institutions have to figure out for themselves. It will probably come down to the retention piece. Like if we want to retain, if it's important for us to retain students of color, or really any students on the margin who we know that are going to have difficulty because of multiple stressors, whether they're people of color, whether they're people who identify as LGBTQIA+, and whether they're sort of first generation or class issues, wherever, if I think institutions are concerned about retention, for those particular groups, they will have to start to make a plan about what are they going to do to make sure those students feel comfortable, that the environment is supportive and safe. And so is that additional staff for mental health? Is that additional staff for affinity groups? Is that, you know, additional training for the current staff? Sort of where do we start to put those resources?
I also feel like institutions have a moral responsibility to meet students' needs. If you're going to accept students and take their money, then you should help them matriculate through your institution. I don't think you should set up an institution in such a way that if they have any challenges that are non-normative, you just kind of let them fall to the side. You've taken their money and you've left them with no degree. And I don't actually think that's fair.
See, I think that's the difference between, let's say, a 4-year college or a 2-year college,
I
right?
think that
Or a
makes sense.
a commuter school. When you look at total cost of education in 4 years, when you estimate that your housing's in there, your food's in there, your transportation's in there, all of that's in there. But when you look at the 2-year colleges, where 50% of our undergraduates in the nation is studying at, we only talk about tuition and fees. So where do they find all the basic needs, including mental health, wellness? It's just not there.
That's brutal when you think about it. No, I'm just saying, I mean, in general, it's just brutal. I have one last question, and that is this. In prepping for this conversation, and, you know, we have a great researcher on the staff, associate producer doing the work. We're doing the work, trying to find stuff. It is very little written about students of color and mental health. So from each of you, what would be an area you think there should be some focused research as we close out this conversation? What would you say?
Yeah, I think the more understanding we have about variability within groups. So we know about the differences between sort of African Americans and Asian Americans. I think of the students who access care the least. And so, but when you sort of pair that apart within each group, there's sort of margins within the margins. So you have people who identify more feminine bodies, or sort of, and then within the trans community, and then people who've experienced trauma, and then people class, and then sort of just a range where people are from, geography. And so I think the more we can start to, and I think then to understand what are the points of resiliency and protective factors that are already in place. We are, again, are so skilled at like getting through really tough times. So to understand the ways that we're already surviving and doing really well, and so in some ways to teach the treaters to have a more of a sort of a collaboration between what are sort of the individuals, the students are going through, what they've accomplished, and what they can teach their professionals.
Area of focus for research.
I really do believe that it's a slicing and dicing of data. You got to get the facts on the table so people don't say, you know, that's not really true. Well, the data is there. But I also think that we need to take on a wellness perspective as well as an illness perspective. We're not out there to rescue people. We're there to make sure that the cultural wealth and the potential of the people who are important are preserved. But that's not the way we look at mental illnesses or challenges within communities of color. We really don't. We think that, you know, folks out there think that they're rescuing. And that attitude has to change if we're going to invest in cultural wealth instead of
Deficit.
deficit and poverty.
Right. And you?
Similar point, going a little further, is kind of focusing on that prevention end. In high schools, there's a lot more attention to social-emotional learning. So teaching adolescent skills, self-awareness, relationship skills, decision-making. So those skills that tap into our emotional health, I think really thinking about those things and think about how we can replicate that at the college level. How do we make sure we're providing culturally responsive interventions and supports that help students of color thrive.
Okay, and finally?
I would say, while I support making sure that students have what they need to grow, I actually think we really need to focus on making institutions healthier places to be. Because I think even when we give students the skills so they can survive in a racist, traumatic, oppressive society, what if we just change the society? So I think it would be, you know, I don't know if we can do it for the whole world right now, but I think institutions, individual systems can become healthier. So if we did research and trained teachers, faculty, everyone in an educational system on how to be more racially and culturally competent and deal with issues of oppression, then the health of the school would better impact the students. And then when we taught them those skills, they could apply them in an environment that felt safe. And I think that's a place that we're lacking in research.
All right, thank you all very much for your great insight and your resources. I know a lot of people will find strength in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you for
having
having
us.
us.